This is my trip report hiking the Pecos Baldy Peak. We waited until June 11th to do this hike because of hearing of snow trouble other people had trying to hike the Pecos Baldy Peak too early. My adult son Garret and several of his friends were not able to make this hike on Memorial Day last year because of snow. Garret and I, Bill Robinson, left the house Friday morning, June 10, 2010 at about 5:30 a.m. and headed to the Pecos Wilderness in New Mexico. We followed the Pecos Wilderness to Jack's Creek parking area and started to hike at about 8 a.m. The elevation of the parking area was 8,835 feet. The sky was clear and the air cool and crisp as we started the hike. We hiked through the woods for a couple of miles, then the trail opened up to a beautiful meadow area. We later crossed a beautiful stream and ate lunch where Garret and his friends had camped the year before when they were not able to make it. We arrived at Pecos Baldy Lake at about 2 p.m. and found a great camping area. The hike was about 7 miles from Jack's Creek parking area and it took us about 6 hours. The elevation of our camp was 11,475 feet. Our packs were around 30 pounds. My pack was 19.6 pounds, not counting food and water. I took 32 of water and the 34 ounces of 2 T-bone steaks that I later cooked on a 2-ounce chicken wire grill. The steaks were great. We had a campfire that evening, then went to bed. I got up at 6:30 a.m. and cooked fresh eggs and sausages. We were greeted, as almost every camping trip in the Pecos Wilderness, by a 7-inch, very curious white and gray bird called the gray jay. They come to the trees right by us and just stare. Our plan was to do 3 mountain peaks. We left the camp at 8:30 and started to hike to East Pecos Baldy, elevation 12,529 feet. This was an elevation gain of over 1,000 feet from camp. We found this peak very easy to do because you did not have to burn it up the mountain. There was a nice trail on the southeast side with switchbacks all the way to the top. We arrived there at 10 a.m., a distance of 1.1 miles from camp. The day was mixed clouds and blue sky. The wind was blowing very strong. We looked at our next peak, Pecos Baldy Peak, elevation 12,500 feet, and could see a small rocky ledge progressing to the peak. We hoped the wind would not cause problems. Even though it was narrow, the wind was blowing very, very strong. It was not a problem making it. We arrived at the peak at 11:10 after 2 miles of hiking. I'm most interested in hiking New Mexico 12 and 13K peaks, but I saw on the map the highest 11K peak in New Mexico, peak 11997. I thought I'd better get that too. When you're standing on the top of the peak, the top of your head is over 12,000 feet in elevation, so why not? I thought the peak was on the ridge line we had been hiking, but it was not. You had to drop down 900 feet in elevation and go back up 400 feet, then return. I thought, no way. Then I kept looking and thought, well, might as well. Garret stayed with the no way. I took off my backpack and decided to run most of it. I ran to the bottom and through the forest and stopped running as I started to go uphill again. I made it there in 32 minutes. A total distance from camp was 3 miles. My GPS said 12,009 feet in elevation. The time was 11:45, 3 hours and 15 minutes from camp. I took pictures and started back. It took another hour to get back, and my legs burned as I went the 900 feet in elevation back to the top of Pecos Baldy Peak. Garret made a windbreak out of rocks while I was gone. We had to climb East Pecos Baldy on a return again. Then I saw a very small peak on the map. Not really a peak, but a peak bump, 11,975. I decided to get that peak bump also. Garret waited at the saddle. We then hiked back to camp and arrived at 3:30 p.m. I had gone 6.6 miles. We had a great dinner of dehydrated beef stroganoff and berry cobbler, then had a campfire and went to bed. We got up at 7:30 a.m., had breakfast and coffee. We packed up and headed back. We left camp at 10 a.m. and hiked the almost 7 miles to Jack's Creek parking area and arrived at 1:30 p.m. A total 3-day hike was 20.6 miles, and the total up-down elevation gain was over a mile, 5,755 feet. On the trip, we saw a couple of deer, some elk, and some very well-fed coyotes. The Pecos Wilderness is one of my favorite places in the world.
Alright, this is Dad. We're coming back down. Got a little river crossing here. We're maybe a third of the way down the mountain. Here comes Dad. Get a real close up. Make sure he doesn't fall in the river. Pretty agile. No falls yet.
Alright, here's Garret. We're heading out June 13th, 2010. Just going back to the Jake's Creek parking lot. Heading down the trail. A wonderful hike. The only thing, the almost hurricane force winds up around Pecos Baldy Peak and Pecos Baldy East Peak. Almost felt like we were going to get gushed off the edge of the mountain. It's been a great trip.